a thin ghost of music in the spinet. I cannot sail your seas, I cannot wander your hill lands, or your cornlands, or your valleys ever again, nor share the battle yonder, where the young knights of broken squadron rally. Only sit quiet, while my mind remembers the beauty of fire from the beauty of embers.
In this episode of Exit Unsolved, we are going to look at the cold case of Lorraine Zimmerman, 15-year-old white female. She went missing from Hagerstown, Maryland on April 6, 1984. Her body was discovered April 14th, 1984, about 10 miles away on a road called Reno Monument Road. Now, let's first, in this case, look at victimology. Okay, what type of person was Lori? She was 15. She was in 9th grade, and she was in the special ed classes, meaning she was a slow learner.
Were you with her throughout the entire high school years?
Yeah, like I said, 7th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade. We had very few friends because we were all like in special ed classes. We got picked on a lot.
This is why we do this. These small town cases. This girl was bullied. She was picked on. And she was murdered. Now, according to interviews with friends, she and her friends, which was a small, tight circle of friends you can imagine, and they got picked on a lot. Now that bothered me. I don't stand for bullies, and I can't stand when somebody is degraded because they don't have money or they don't wear name brand clothing.
She was very polite and kind, quiet. We had very few friends because we were all like in special ed classes. We got picked on a lot. We didn't wear name brand clothes. We got picked on a lot. There was just a group of us. And like I said, every day at lunchtime, you had recess, you get picked on. Yeah. People in high school, the one time in the cafeteria, a girl went up and sprayed perfume all over, and they got into a fist fight.
But does that play into why Lori was murdered? That's what we got to figure out. So when we look at her victimology, she was not just a slow learner, but she seemed very loyal and had a small circle of friends, and she didn't trust. She wasn't naive. She wasn't scared either, meaning she would walk home from school. You imagine she was 15. She was going to be 16 in that month of April before she was murdered. And so that plays into whether she was abducted or whether it was somebody that she knows. And that's what we have to break down in this episode. So let's get to the timeline. Here we have a girl who gets off the bus. Now there's conflicting reports of whether she rode the bus or she walked. The police reports indicate that she rode the bus, but the friends that we interviewed stated that she walked home from school that day. Now, in the grand scheme of things, I don't think it matters because she had contact, whether she got off the bus or she walked home. She had contact next around 4:15 with her aunt. Now, her aunt lived in the 300 block of Franklin Street. And in fact, the day previous And that day, Lori and her family, which consisted of her mom and her grandmother, were moving from their address, which was in the 200 block of Franklin Street, to her place at 820 Concord Street. So that kind of convolutes things the way you look at it, but let's simplify it. She got done with school. She went to her aunt's house. Her aunt visually saw her. She told her aunt, hey, I'm going to my old residence, 200 block, which a block away, to see if my grandmother is done packing, if they got anything, they need any help. Then that's it. Her aunt watched her walk to this intersection, and she was never seen again. It's unknown whether she made it to her old address in the 200 block of Franklin Street, because her grandmother had already finished packing, and her mother, so they were already at the house of 820 Concord. So it's unknown whether she actually made it there, because she was never seen again. So now I want to fast forward to the body dump location. I use that in quotations because the police, in their reports and their statements that they have made to the public, stated that they believe that Lori Zimmerman was killed elsewhere and her body was dumped on the Reno Monument Road. Now, we'll get into whether I agree with that or not, but let's look at the day that she was found. April 14th, 1984. 8 days later, after she had gone missing, Lori's body is discovered by two hikers in the woods, about 70 yards off of the main road, the Reno Monument Road. As you can see here, when retired trooper Jeff Hewitt takes us to the scene.
This is right about here is about where Lori was found. Well, she was found here Saturday morning about 8:30, 9:30 on April 14th, 1984. She came missing a little more than a week earlier, April 6th, which was a Friday at about 4 o'clock in Hagerstown, which is about 15 miles north of here. As you can see, it's pretty secluded here.
Right.
I mean, the closest house in either direction is probably a quarter to half a mile away. There was a house closer just up the road, but that's since been torn down. And I don't even think anyone lived there at the time the body was found.
Huh.
She was found here in a fetal position, mostly nude. She had a piece of cardboard over top of her and a cinder block on top of that cardboard weighting it down. Had obvious blunt force trauma to the head and face. She had an object in her throat, which she died of asphyxiation. That was the cause of death.
From what he says, there's a couple of things that is of interest to me. One is that her body was covered with a cardboard box. Number two, that a cinder block was placed over top of that box. And thirdly, that there was an object lodged in her throat. And that object is of mystery. The police are keeping that tight to their vest. I don't even know what that object is, even though I certainly inquired, because it could be a valuable part of this assessment. Yet, they're keeping it back, and for good reason, and I understand why. Because if you have somebody who comes forward and says, hey, I'm confessing to this murder, and then all of a sudden they can't tell you what that object is, well, then you know it's a false confession. And yes, false confessions happen all the time. So I understand why they're keeping that out. I don't think, and it's hard for me to say this, but I'm going to assume based off the conversations I've had with the police, that object really had no bearing. Meaning, I don't know. You could go down a rabbit hole. And let's say that object was a golf ball, for example. Well, he's a golfer, right? It's somebody or it's somebody who has issues with her walking across a golf course. See what I mean? You think too much into it. But it would be nice to know what that object is. But when I'm told by the police, listen, it really has no bearing on the case. Well, I like to be the one that determines that in my assessments, as you can understand. But there has to be some sort of trust factor. And I trust that the police are telling me the truth, that it has no bearing.
There's always been curiosity as to what that object was. It's very insignificant to the case.
Okay.
What that object was. And there's only a few select troopers that work the case that actually know what it is. That's the only reason it was never named. Like I said, it has no bearing on the case whatsoever. And the only people that want to know what it was is just people that, curiosity seekers, basically. So for that reason, I respect Lori, I respect the investigation, and as Forrest Gump says, that's all I got to say about that.
That's what we have at the body dump location. It's a long drive from where she was last seen to where her body was discovered. Does that lead me to believe anything? Well, no. Because serial offenders in the past have been known to drive many miles with dead human beings in their back seat, in their trunk. I think of Joel Rifkin. Obviously think of Ted Bundy. So that always amazed me, because you would think that, and Ed Kemper did it too, but you would think that you would be worried, scared of somebody seeing you, the police pulling you over for whatever reason. But that doesn't seem to deter a lot of these offenders. So this 10-mile track to Reno Monument Road, I don't think it really has a bearing on the case either. So what we need to focus on is greed, sex, or revenge. What does this murder fall under? Well, we can take away greed for the most part. There's no robbery. She was found with her jewelry on her body. She was always lived in low income housing, which means she had moved, I believe, 6 times since 1968. She was used to moving, and all those locations were low income housing. Now, that plays into her victimology because she's used to it. Now, remember, one of the red flags that I had in this case was when I first saw that she was moving that day, or the day previous they had moved to a new house. That always, anytime there's something out of the norm, out of the flow, you have to consider that as a possible motive, for a reason as to, listen, this is different. Meaning, let's say for an example, the individual that was murdered always walked home the same route every day. Never deviated from that route. Then the day that she went missing, she decided to go up a different street past a garage that worked on automobiles. Well, that is significant. You can't just brush that off. Hey, she was perfectly fine every day she walked this normal route. One day that she deviates from that route, she's murdered. So when something like that happens, you have to look into it. So the fact that she was moving, and she moved the day to a new neighborhood, Granted, the new neighborhood was only a 30-minute walk away, but that's still a different part of the town. So, does that play into this? I think it does. I also think that it didn't bother her, meaning she was used to moving.
I lived out on the dual highway. Of course, she lived in town on Franklin Street, but it was near the dual highway, that part of Franklin Street where it ended, and we'd meet halfway.
So it definitely would not be unusual to see you or her, you guys walking back and forth on a regular basis. Like neighbors would be familiar with you if you walked by, they would know, you know.
According to her friends, she did not like her small, cramped quarters of her previous home.
I mean, I couldn't spend the night with her. Her house, I guess, was small and too many people there.
Yeah.
But it seemed like the 820 Concord home seemed to open it up. So if anything, she was a little bit happier to be moving to this new place. But it appears to me that she may have caught the eye of the offender when she moved to this new location. Because of her victimology, we know she wouldn't get into a car with a stranger. She wasn't infatuated with older boys. Nothing like that. And when we look at the greed, sex, and revenge, again, she didn't have any money. She didn't make enemies. Yes, she was bullied. Yes, she was picked on. But because of the body dump location and how she was found, shirt pulled up, bra pulled up, her underwear pulled down to her ankles, socks on, no shoes, her pants under her head. That's a big indicator right there, folks. That's a big indicator. Now, so because of that, we can say, hey, it wasn't greed and it wasn't revenge. This, without a doubt, was a sexually motivated crime. So we can rule out that she was being picked on. I mean, she was, and there's no excuse for that. None. But she wasn't killed because of that. This was an offender who had the sexual fantasy urge on his mind. So let's talk about the offender. What type of offender are we looking at?
She had the blunt force trauma, and the medical examiner said that it was more than a fist. So, you know, was it a brick? Was it a hammer? Was it, a rock? Whatever. Yeah. But it was more than a fist, according to her.
Now, because of her injuries, her jaw was fractured in 3 locations. Her lip was split open, and her teeth were busted. So, to me, that could have been done with a fist, but more than likely not. I believe that it was a combination of a fist and an object. But what is of significance here is the neck compressions, which means she was strangled. Now, I said I wanted to get back to where she was killed at, but I think more than likely Lori was killed in that vehicle, meaning the offender's vehicle. The offender is not going to abduct Lori at 4 o'clock in the afternoon in a town where there's sidewalks and people are walking by and kill and murder her in the car in broad daylight. Sure, it's possible, but it's not probable. So more than likely, if she was abducted, or the possibility exists that she went with the offender willingly.
Now, when I talked to her friend, she's very close friends with her in high school, she said that Lori wasn't the kind of person that would just get into a car with someone. Do you think she may have
that's
known?
what puzzles me. Does he have the gift of gab and he was able to talk her into the car, take you around the block to your house? Or
I believe they went to that location for whatever reason. It's secluded. and the offender killed her in the car. Now, I would be honest in saying, hey, I'm not 100% sure about that, but the shoes being left inside the car, her clipboard, which she was carrying, never found again. The offender would have to drag her or carry her, she weighed 110 pounds, out to 70 yards from where he would have to park his car. Now, I'd be interested in drag marks. I didn't see that the police report indicated anything like that. That's significant when trying to determine whether there's one or two offenders. Not always, but it could help. And it could also determine the strength of the offender. If he threw her over his shoulders and carried her out there because there's no drag marks. Because of the clothing being disheveled and pulled up on the body, shirt pulled up, exposing her breast, bra pulled up, her pants removed, placed under her head, and her panties pulled down to her ankles without her shoes. Her shoes were never found, nor was a clipboard that she had. That had to have been done right there in the woods. It had to have been. Because if the assault occurred inside an automobile or at a home at another location, I can't see the transporting of a body with the panties pulled down to her ankles, no shoes. They would be pulled up. I believe that. You know, same with the shirt. I think it gets moved, it gets pulled up, and the panties pulled down in the woods. Now, why would somebody do that? Why would an offender do that? It's not for shock value, okay? It's not, and what I mean by that is they are not wanting to shock whoever finds her. You know, sometimes offenders will put the legs spread open or whatever it is, so when somebody finds her, it's degrading to her and it shocks the person. I don't think it was done here. And why? Because cardboard box was placed over top of her. The only reason you do that is, one, because you are trying to hide the body from, delay it from being discovered. Or two, which I think is a good possibility, you're trying to protect the victim. Now, what do I mean by that? Her pants are pulled completely off of her and placed under her head. Why would an offender do that? And then you place the cardboard on top with a cinder block. Why do you do that? Because in the offender's mind, he's protecting her from the elements. He wants her to be comfortable in death. Think about that. Think about how depraved an individual must be to fracture a girl's jaw 3 times, split her lip, break her teeth, strangle her, suffocate her, which was the original cause of death, with an object in her throat. And then let's play nice. Now I'll put your pants underneath your head as a pillow, and I will cover you from the elements with this cardboard box. So what do we know about the offender? I would say that the thing that we have to determine first was whether she was abducted or she went willingly. Now, being abducted, we don't have a time when this happened. We can surmise that it happened between 4:15 when she left her aunt's and 6, because she should have been home by then. And she was pretty responsible, and it would be out of her character to just like run away for this to happen at a later time. So for me as an investigator, I could say, okay, based off of her victimology, 4:15 to probably 6 o'clock, something happened. Could she have been abducted? Yes. Yes. It doesn't take much to put a gun to the back of somebody's neck and say, get in the car or I will kill you. You comply. So I am unable to deduce whether A, she was abducted, or B, she got in willingly. I can't determine that. Now, it would be easy to say, well, it was somebody she knew, because she wouldn't get into a car with somebody she didn't know, and this person cared for her because he placed her pants underneath her head as a pillow. So it'd be easy, but you really can't do that. Because again, in this offender's mind, he could abduct her, sexually assault her, then have remorse. And then place the pants under the head, the cardboard over top of her with a cinder block. Now, I had a hard time originally with the cardboard and the cinder block. Because when we look at the body dump location today, it doesn't look junky. It looks like woods. If I walk out into my woods of central Pennsylvania, I'm not finding a cinder block. And I'm not finding a piece of cardboard. So, to me, I almost, as ridiculous as it sounds, I almost had to think the offender brought these objects, or he had these objects in his trunk of his car, and he used them. But after talking with the investigator that was there and is familiar with the case, he told me that that area was a dump location, not body dump, garbage. So it would not be unusual to find those items in the area. So I'll have to take his word for that. It would be a whole new assessment had that not been the case. So you're looking at an offender that is from the area. And I'm going to say he lived closer to the Concord Street address, more than likely. If I had to make an educated guess, I would say that she made it to her old address in the 200 block of Franklin Street that she had just moved out of. She got there, her grandmother wasn't there, her mother wasn't there, they were all in the new house. Then she started her walk from there to Concord, and that's when it occurred. It's not a stranger. It's not somebody that just was driving through town. Because I don't believe that they would know that the 10-mile route to a secluded location to either sexually assault her in the vehicle and dump her body, or just dump her body. I'm not going to rule out completely that she was killed somewhere else. I don't think there's enough evidence to do that. But if she was, and if it was at home, it would be in the radius of her Concord Street home, is my belief. This is an extremely sad case to me. Here you have a young girl who never did anything to nobody. She was already had a rough life. She was picked on. She was bullied. She had moved from home to home. Her parents had been divorced. She was making the best out of life, volunteering her time to work at a center. And some depraved sexual offender did this to her. And what was the object that was stuffed down her throat and in her mouth? I don't know what it was, but I can tell you it was probably to shut her up, to keep her from screaming, and no other reason. So I would assume that it could be dirt. It just could be an object that was close by when she was being assaulted. That's my guess. Again, I'm not comfortable on that, but I will say that is more probable than not in this case. The offender, I think, would have exhibited some sort of change in his behavior after this happened. Remember, pre-offense and post-offense is very important. Pre-offense being, what was the trigger? What was it that made him on that day take Lori's life? And then the post-offense. Again, I think this killer has a diluted sense of reality. And I think he probably showed remorse. I base that on her pants being placed under her head and the cardboard on top of her. You're already taking her to a secluded location. And yet you're going to now put cardboard on top of her. If he had just done that, I would not make the deduction that he was remorseful or cared about the victim. Then, because Ted Bundy take his victims to a secluded location in the woods. Some other people took them to secluded locations and buried them in the woods. So it's a double step. So if he did that and put the cardboard and the cinder block, okay, but the pants underneath the head is very significant. And I believe it shows remorse, or that the offender had some sort of delusional sense of reality. Almost as if you're my girlfriend type of thing. You made me do this. You rejected my advances. But I care for you. Therefore, I'm going to take your pants and place them under the head. I believe that the victim may have came back to the crime scene. You know, it's definitely a sexually motivated crime. He could have came back and masturbated at the crime scene, without a doubt. Or at least drove that location and pulled over. So if somebody had seen a car after this happened, parked up there, that would be a good lead. That'd be something I'd want to follow up on. Sometimes we can't decide what, when, why, how in cold cases. But it's very important to get this information out, to tell the story of some of these cases that do not make the mainstream news. That's why Lori's case is important. It affected people. Not just her family, her aunt, her grandmother, her cousin, her mom, her dad. But how about the community? How about the investigators? How about Jeff Hewitt, who wrote a book about his time in the Maryland State Police and included a segment on Lori because it affected him. He didn't have to go back out to the crime scene with us and bring back all those memories, but he did. And why? Because he cares. That's why it's important to get this information out there. It's a scary world, folks. There's evil out there. But the more people know about these cases, and the more they know about Lori Zimmerman, the better chance we have of getting resolution to these cases and getting these evil people off of the streets. Listen, the reality of it is that cold cases are like a great white shark. They roam the night, haunting our dreams. When I reopened the case, in typical MSP fashion, I wasn't given the ample time to do everything I wanted to do. To this day, I have some suspicions and a possible suspect, even though he was originally looked at before. Of course, no one ever heard of DNA and crime solving back then, and there is still no known evidence that still exists that could help in that aspect. However, I feel there are still some avenues that could be explored if they were really interested in closing the case. It might not be closed by arrest, but the accused could be identified for some closure of the sake of the family of this little girl. It had never been solved. Justice served? Absolutely not.
I decided last minute to come here and just take a moment to take in everything. It's just so quiet here. Raindrops are hitting the trees, the birds are chirping, but imagine this in April. It gets dark after 5. It'd be so dark back here. It's so beautiful back here. But then you know that Lori was back here for 8 nights by herself, alone, in the coldness, in the wetness, in the darkness, and it just changes. It changes your entire perspective.
That's it for this edition of Exit Unsolved.
I'll look for snakes.
Okay. Excellent. So what are your thoughts on her being found back here?
Well, I've got my thoughts on the whole case, and we'll go over that. Kind of steep right there. We better walk up here a little bit. We'll be able to see the truck, so your stuff will be safe.
Yeah, I'm gonna get stuck. It's all right.
Looks like it. Well, I got guns in there too, so.
Oh, gotcha. So there's absolutely no other way to get back here. Ooh,
Now,
other than to walk.
this is right about here is about where Lori was found.
So she would have had to been drugged that entire way.
Well, oh yeah, or carried. Well, she was found here Saturday morning about 8:30, 9:30 on April 14th, 1984. She came missing a little more than a week earlier, April 6th, which was a Friday at about 4 o'clock in Hagerstown, which is about 15 miles north of here. As you can see, it's pretty secluded here.
Right.
I mean, the closest house in either direction is probably a quarter to half a mile away. There was a house closer just up the road, but that's since been torn down. And I don't even think anyone lived there at the time the body was found.
Okay.
She was found here in a fetal position, mostly nude. She had a piece of cardboard over top of her and a cinder block on top of that cardboard weighting it down. Had obvious blunt force trauma to the head and face. She had an object in her throat, which she died of asphyxiation. That was the cause of death. And most likely that object is what
Now I've heard
made
that.
her suffocate.
Yeah, I've heard that object was anything from a piece of yarn to her underwear to a plastic bag. Can you
Well,
speak on that or no?
It's always been, there's always been curiosity as to what that object was. It's very insignificant to the case,
Okay.
what that object was. And there's only a few select troopers that work the case that actually know what it is. And reason being is, if we get some whack job down the road that wants to confess to a bunch of murders that he didn't do, other than the troopers, there's only one other person who knows what that object is.
Right.
And that would be the person who put it there.
Right.
For that's the only reason it was never named. Like I said, it has no bearing on the case whatsoever. And the only people that want to know what it was is just people that, curiosity seekers, basically. So for that reason, I respect Lori. I respect the investigation. And as Forrest Gump says, that's all I got to say about that.
Gotcha.
So she was found here now, but I was a primary investigator on 2 other murders that happened within a mile radius of this area.
Okay.
And after I retired from law enforcement, I did some contractual security work for a government facility, which is about remote facility about 3 miles up the road. So I travel this road at nighttime a lot, and quite often late at night, well, periodically, I'd just stop the truck, shut the lights off, get out, and kind of reflect on some of these cases that I had. Well, you've heard of the proverbial cold chills going up and down your spine. It happened, and I'm not a big fan of paranormal activity and all that. I don't buy into all that stuff, but there's a lot of things I can't explain. But I've always had my feelings, and a person of interest in this case.
Okay.
That even from the get-go, at the time this happened, I was still in uniform. I wasn't an investigator. That didn't happen until about a year after this case. And while I was in uniform, I had a very similar case that occurred. There was only one question, and that was a big if this guy was in Hagerstown on April the 6th in the afternoon. Now, I knew where he was April the 6th at 9:30 that night. He was at a bar about 50 miles south of here, where he picked up 2 girls, drove them into West Virginia, drove them into Virginia, raped them, tried to kill them, left one for dead in a house in the southern part of the county where he was from, and she ultimately escaped from this abandoned house that he threw her in. And
From what I read, that was brutal.
he beat her in the head. He did shove her underwear in her mouth, trying to suffocate her. Fortunately, she didn't. But if we look at the 2 cases, the MOs are so similar, that I couldn't help but think this was a person of interest as far as I was concerned.
And the timing, it was
that night.
Yeah.
And he had just gotten out of jail on rape charges before that. So my theory is, if it was him, maybe he was on a sexual rage and he went to Hagerstown looking for a prostitute. He found this young girl walking the street, picked her up, and did his dastardly deed, and on his way home, or on his way to his next victims that night, this is where he dumped her. Now, again, just speculation on my
Sure.
part, just theory. I talked to the investigators at the time that was handling this case, the primary investigators, just about all of which are dead now. Keith Wattenshade didn't pick it up till a few years later. Well, I'll get into that. But I talked to them, and they just kind of blew it off, saying, no, we kind of feel he's not the guy. We had this suspect in Frederick County that they was looking at, and this guy that they was looking at is actually in jail on other charges. He's going to be there the rest of his life. And I figured, well, they looked at this guy and he didn't find anything. So it wasn't years later that I found out through some of the guys in the homicide unit that they never really looked at this guy. His name wasn't even in the case file. So, it kind of gave me concern. And again, I talked to some of the other older guys then, and some of the guys that reviewed the cases never saw the name in the files. So I contacted the cold case squad after that, a sergeant down there. So I met with him. I went over all the similarities between the two cases. Again, he never saw the name before. He agreed with me that there's a lot of coincidences there, if not.
Right.
And he went to the Western Correctional Institute and interviewed this guy. Talked to him for a couple hours. Said he developed a good rapport with him. But he admitted that he actually tried to kill the two girls, but denied any involvement in Lori. And, maybe he knew that he didn't actually have him.
Do you know when he was interviewed?
Pardon me?
Do you know when he was interviewed?
That would have been probably 2 years ago.
Okay.
Around there.
Now, the suspect that you're talking about, is he in prison now?
He is. He served his time in West Virginia and Virginia, and now he's serving his Maryland time, and I don't know how much he actually got here.
So every state got him?
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. I hope he spends the rest of his life there.
What was the crime like in Hagerstown around 1984?
It wasn't, it wasn't crime infested. You had your drug problems. You didn't have murders once a week. It was just your typical small city.
Sure.
Your burglaries, your thefts, your robberies, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Now, you ended up coming in around the time that the psychic came in.
But
so I read that didn't bring in any leads, though. Is that correct?
any what?
Any leads? Like, no one called the tip line?
If they did, it didn't pan out to be anything. I don't know of any viable tips that came out of that. If what she said was accurate, then just that information. But even that information didn't. It was kind of vague. Right. Although she was specific on some things, it was kind of vague on others.
Yeah. Okay.
So it was a made-for-television thing. It got ratings. Yeah. But at the same time,
I figured it would bring a lot of attention and to the
well, just the fact that the case came back up. There were calls coming in from all over the country afterwards. But again, they didn't pan out to be anything. It was just armchair detectives that saw this on TV and said, hey, maybe he did it, maybe he did it.
Right.
And again, they were all ruled out. So it brought tips, just not viable tips. But yeah.
And how long did you work this case?
Pardon me?
Did you work this case until you retired?
No, I actually picked up on it in, I think, 94, like 10 years later. Every once in a while, we would just publicize it so that we could get some tips. If anybody wanted to come forward, anybody had any information, well, we publicized it. And I got a call from a lady that said, hey, I was through that area about that time, and I remember seeing a guy and girl arguing outside a car. So I didn't come forward at the time because I was afraid. But now I have children, and they're about that age, and I feel that I should come forward and talk about it. So anyhow, I talked to her, interviewed her, and she told me that she had actually seen a car with a guy and a girl arguing, parked out very similar to where we're parked. We had a hypnotist in MSP that was pretty good at what he did, named Sergeant Katz. And again, the information gained under hypnosis can't be used, but any information you gain as a result of that information,
Sure.
you can use.
Right.
So he hypnotized her, and she described the guy and girl under hypnosis as an older girl, late 20s, 30s, with long brown hair. And he was in a dark colored car out here arguing with an older guy. Well, that didn't fit the description of Lori, because she was 15, 3 weeks shy of her 16th birthday at the time she was killed. And it just didn't describe her at all, short blonde hair. So nothing came out of that. Again, it was publicized, but at least we did something with it.
It's kind of an odd spot. I mean, unless it was different back in 1984, because, you know, you had not a hard time pulling off the road, but it's not like you could just pull off the road and not be noticed.
Right, but you got to realize too, in the evenings, well, if you think about April, it gets dark, 5:30?
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah.
So, you're fairly secluded here, and there's not that much traffic goes over this. At least in 1984, there's a lot of commuter traffic going by now. But in 84, you didn't have all that commuter traffic. There was a lot less population in Washington County than there is now. So, it was kind of the road less traveled. And I think that's why I had the other body, or the other homicide that I had, the body was just dumped at a monument right up the road here.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, there's nothing but trees.
Yeah. And she was found by just some locals walking through the mountain in the morning.
Okay.
Saturday morning, just out for a walk. They may have been mushroom hunting, who knows?
Right.
But they came up on this piece of cardboard and moved it, and lo and behold, there was a body under it. And the cardboard in the center block was probably just trash that people threw out along the road here. It was here. I don't think that the culprit brought it with him for that purpose.
Do you think that she was here that entire time?
I think she was here from the time she was turned up missing, from that previous Friday. So yeah, I think she was here for a week. And especially if my theory holds true on that person of interest, I think he dumped her here, right after he assaulted her.
Yeah.
And went on to his next victims.
I mean, with what you say, he's a pretty viable suspect. But
I thought
you think
so.
it's just head games, not wanting to admit to it?
Well, very well could be. I mean, he's still getting out eventually, so he's got something to lose if he admits to it now.
Gotcha.
He'll never get out.
Gotcha.
But, people usually only admit to it if you've got something on them that make them admit to it.
Okay.
And the only thing we had was just hunches.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it was violent.
Yeah. According to the medical examiner, she had the blunt force trauma, and the medical examiner said that it was more than a fist. So, was it a brick? Was it a hammer? Was it, a rock? Whatever.
Yeah.
But it was more than a fist, according to her.
Now, when I talked to her friend, she's very close friends with her in high school. She said that Lori wasn't the kind of person that would just get into a car with someone. Do you think she may
and
have
that's
known?
what puzzles me about this guy. Why, does he have the gift of gab, and he was able to talk her into the car like he did the other two girls?
Sure.
I mean, they felt safe being in pairs, but she was alone. They offer, hey, take you around the block to your house, or what? I don't know. Everybody comes up with this, with the question, rightfully so, what about DNA? Well, the DNA that they recovered was so minute. They tested it, and that minute piece was destroyed as a result of the test. And it didn't give them any results because of it. So I don't know. I would like to see someone lay out all the evidence, you know, the clothes, the pictures, everything, and just look at everything one more time.
Yeah. I'm wondering if they'll ever consider exhuming her body for more DNA.
You know what? I thought that too, but if you think about it, between all the, there'd probably be nothing left of inside her vagina. You know, if it was, she was sexually assaulted there, if there was any trace before. And as far as everything else, it would probably be so decomposed. The body would have been cleaned, you know, by the mortician. So most likely you're not going to find a hair or anything like that on her. That would be in the clothes, if you're going to find that.
As far as you know, is the evidence still around?
The last I heard, I never actually saw the entire case file myself. Even when I was working on it, I had sent off for it, but it was at the Hall of Records down in Annapolis. And, you know, there's boxes of it. That was basically it. But, you know, I don't know what's there, what's left, or what's there to look at now. Well, she was about 70 yards off the roadway, and the closest road is Lamb's Knoll Road, which is just a few hundred yards east of here.
Just tell me, like, what role you played in Lori's life, your friendship, and just a little bit about her.
We were pretty close. I mean, she'd come out the house and spend the night, and we went to the city park one time together. I had to climb in the bathrooms to get in there to go to the bathroom.
So
Climbed
Henri,
in the windows. Me, her, and another friend of hers. She was very polite and kind, quiet. We had very few friends because we were all like in special ed classes. We got picked on a lot. We didn't wear name brand clothes. We got picked on a lot. There was just a group of us. And like I said, every day at lunchtime, you know, you had recess, you get picked on. People in high school, the one time in the cafeteria, a girl went up and sprayed perfume all over, and they got into a fist fight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awful.
Yeah.
So she definitely struggled with friendships within.
Yeah.
And it doesn't sound like it's anything to her fault.
And she'd keep to herself.
Yeah.
But still, people would like mock and say things.
Now, were you with her throughout the entire high school years?
Yeah, like I said, 7th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade. And like one time in 4th grade, when I actually met her, she went to Winter Street School for a short time. And her birthday was in April.
I saw that.
Yeah.
Had she just turned 15? Or was she about to turn 16?
About to turn 16. I lived out on the Dual Highway. Of course, she lived in town on Franklin Street, but it was near the Dual Highway, that part of Franklin Street where it ended. And we'd meet halfway.
Was she frequently kind of like walking downtown? Was that something that she or you guys did a good bit?
Well, like I said, I lived on the Dual Highway, and a lot of times we'd meet halfway. Walk around outside. Other people our age, we roller skate. I had roller skates. We'd roller skate on the sidewalk, or on the weekend go to the park. You know.
Okay. So it definitely would not be unusual to see you or her, you guys walking back and forth on a regular basis. Like neighbors would be familiar with you if you walked by; they would know. You know. So you guys were pretty close.
Yeah, and like I said, she'd spend the night with me. I couldn't spend the night with her. Her house, I guess, was small and too many people there.
Yeah. Can you tell me about that? Who was in the home and how that dynamic was?
I know it was her mother and her grandmother, and I believe Charles was living there too, because he was usually there. I usually play in the backyard. I didn't get to go in the house often. She had a small bedroom. Like I said, the house was small that she lived in.
Yeah. And what was Charles' relationship again?
Cousin.
And he was 17, is that correct?
I think he was older, yes.
And the 820 Concord Street, that was actually the street that we had listed as her mom's place. But you said that was kind of, there was something different about that?
They was moving that day.
Okay.
And I know her grandmother Pearl lived with her there on Franklin Street, so I guess they all was moving there to Concord Street. They were moving that day, and she says, I want to walk home. Would you walk home with me? And a couple other friends was going to walk too with her. Well, they left her down there on Franklin Street because she believed that she was supposed to meet her mom there to finish moving and packing. And they said the last place they seen her was up in the 400 block of Washington Avenue at her aunt's.
At her aunt's?
Yeah, it says in the paper, at her aunt's house.
Okay. Do you know that to be correct from what you...
That's was the last person that seen her. That had to be somewhere between Washington Avenue and Concord Street. Yeah. But then the psychic on Unsolved said she got into a car down near the library. Lori just don't get into cars unless she knows somebody.
Okay. That's what I was going to ask you.
Because there would be times we'd be walking on the dual highway, because like I said, I lived off a dual highway. I lived at Townhouse Manor, so we'd have to walk along the dual highway, and a car would beep or say something, and she'd say, oh, shut up. Yeah.
You would say she was pretty cautious in that aspect?
Yeah. She's pretty cautious, I would say. I don't see Lori just getting in a car with somebody. I had a boy that sat behind me in history. He was a medic, volunteer medic, learning how to do stuff. He says, I seen her. He says it was horrible.
Yeah.
These articles of, this was the first one, these are the second one, and then it goes in order to 10 years.
Yeah.
I think that's in 14 years case.
Yeah. You've saved them all, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Did she have a boyfriend?
At that time, she did. Before they moved, I think she had said that she had broke up with him or something. He was, his name was Brian, and he worked at McDonald's.
Okay.
And I can't even remember the last name.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you ever meet him?
No.
Okay.
She just told me about him.
Okay.
But she never got, no details or anything.
Do you happen to know around the age range? Was he her age or? Older?
Yeah. Yeah.